Oh, this is
There's
just
one simple vision
the
hack
live
anyone can use to.
Yep. All right, we're good.
So I'm the public can watch it.
Let's enlarge that. Yeah.
All right. Now everyone who's waiting should be able to get in.
So Becky, now we're on.
All right, there you go.
Hey, Becky.
Hi all, sorry if I made it difficult not being there in person.
You did not.
That's good, but we won't tell you that.
Don't worry, I'll be back down there next week.
Okay, are we all set? Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here in person and virtually. I'd like to start with introductions. If we can start this into the table.
Good morning, Letitia Yazzie, Water Resource Director for the Ute Tribe.
Steve Wolf, Southwestern Water Conservation.
Salif Hawkins, the Nature Conservancy.
Lisa Yellow Eagle, Southern Ute Indian Tribe.
And Kelsey McElroy, Langdon Group Facilitator, Note Taker.
And Becky Mitchell, Colorado's Commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission.
Great, thank you. Can you hear us okay, Becky?
Yep.
All right. Let's see. First thing on the agenda is to review and approve the agenda. We've got the agenda for the Colorado River Sub Task Force meeting for October 30th. Has everyone reviewed the agenda? Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Any seconds? Thank you. All right, we've got an agenda. And then next we need to move on to review and approve the meeting minutes, which I don't think we did at the last meeting. We have meeting minutes for the October 11th meeting and then the meeting minutes for October 23rd. Did everyone get a chance to review both sets of meeting minutes or notes?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for sending that again this morning.
Yep, no problem. Would anyone like to motion to approve those notes?
I would move to approve those meeting minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Great, thank you. We've got a motion and a second for the approval of the meeting minutes for October 11th and October 23rd. And we will move on to our second agenda item, which is the public comment period. We can do this in person, and if there's anyone online who would like to make a public comment, please go ahead. Or do you need to explain the process?
Yeah, I can explain the
Okay.
process. If you are online and you would like to make a public comment to the sub-task force, please go ahead and put your name into the Q&A. And everyone who signs up, we will go in order, and you'll have 3 minutes to make your public comment to the task force. So if you'd like to do that, please put your name in the Q&A now. We'll hold for about 30 seconds to see if anyone does. All right, last chance if you'd like to put your name into the Q&A to make a public comment. We have no takers today. Pete, since since you're our only public member of the public, you want to say anything?
I think it's just great that we're having these sub-task force meetings and there's more attention being put on tribal issues. And Celine, Steve, and Becky, appreciate your willingness to be on the sub-task force. And appreciate all the time and effort put towards this.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Pete, for your public comment. Maybe we can reserve some time at the end of the meeting to see if anyone else joins and wants to make a public comment at the end of the meeting. Would anyone like to make a motion to close the public comment period?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And so we will move right into our third agenda item. What we have for discussion is continuing our discussion on the solutions or potential solutions to existing hurdles and challenges to get tribes to a place where they can use their settlement water. During the last meeting, Ute Mountain Ute Tribes representative asked the members of the sub-task force to also provide any ideas or solutions for the tribes to be able to address the hurdles that are in place currently. So I will open up the floor to any comments.
Question. Are we skipping clean water?
Oh, am I looking at the wrong agenda? No, we're not. Sorry, I just had it down. I had my laptop toggled down too far. Okay, so moving back where it's on the agenda, we've got the agenda item, tribal access to clean water. And this was a question asked by Celine during one of our maybe our second meeting. And she had asked whether the tribes had thought about the legislation concerning tribal access to clean water. So let's go ahead and address that question now. Do you have anything to address or answer for that question, Letitia?
As I mentioned, the previous meeting, I think Durango is, there's only 2 households in Toyoak that don't have access to the municipal line, and the update that I received is that the tribe is working with them to get electricity, so they would be able to be connected to the main line. But other than that, I don't really have anything under tribal access to clean water, other than just the municipal, upgrading the municipal line.
Great, thank you. And I was able to speak to Southern Utes Utilities Department last week, and they actually have not had the chance or the opportunity to review the legislation, the tribal access to clean water legislation. And so they weren't able to tell me whether, well, they just haven't considered whether they'd be able to apply for funds pursuant to that legislation. But we talked further just about access to piped clean water, and they don't know how many tribal members lack that access. They were able to tell me that they do provide water to 500 homes on the reservation, and that's tribal members. So they serve 500 homes, and they also haul potable water to 63 tribal homes. And so those houses have cisterns that are large enough for 1,800 gallons. And then utilities has the ability to deliver water twice a week. So the families do pay for that service. And if they need water delivered twice a week, they can get that water delivered. I wasn't sure how many people actually use twice a week or if they only got water once a week, but that's the setup right now. And so in order to get that service, tribal members are responsible for installing and maintaining the cisterns on their own. And I was told that Indian Health Service does assist with installation of cisterns. I IHS also helps people with installation of wells. But the list for putting your name onto that list, and the wait list is, putting your name on the list is one thing, and then there's the wait list is actually quite a long while. I think he said the utilities person told me that there is someone on their staff who is waiting for a well right now, and it's been at least a year, and he doesn't know how much longer it'll be. And then in addition to that, wells may not be the best solution in this area because of the quality of the groundwater. And so that's another issue that you would have to deal with if you were trying to install a well, is figuring out the quality of the groundwater to make sure that it would be worth the effort of putting in the well. When I asked whether there were areas for a need for either piped water or more water service, utilities department did tell me that there is an area along Highway 172 that they are trying to figure out how to get water service to the homes, and there are about 10 to 20, there's about 20 homes that they would like to get water service to, but conceivably they're thinking that there are about 10 homes that they could get to right off the bat, and then they would have to figure out how to get to the additional 10 homes. So they are looking for money to do the design for that project. And then after that, they'd have to figure out how to get past the issues such as the jurisdiction issues, because there are a lot of allotments out there, and also non-Indian homes. And there was a question posed by the subtask force about whether utilities had ever thought about putting in a project that would include non-Indians if those were the lands that a pipeline would need to cross. And they said they just hadn't thought about that because, one, there's just no funding right now, but two, it takes a lot of effort to get past the jurisdictional issues. And then another issue that they've come up, that they've hit, is some of the grants that they've seen for tribes are only for tribal lands. So even if they got that grant, it would only apply to tribal lands, and they wouldn't be able to then build across non-tribal lands. So I think it's just, it's a challenge, and it's not something they've considered because they don't actually have the funding for it, but they've also seen the roadblock already in some grants that they would have to keep the infrastructure on tribal lands. So it's not something that they've thought more about as to whether they should try to build a project that would go across non-tribal lands. And that, but knowing that there's a project that they could potentially put together for 10 to 20 additional tribal homes, I did ask them to send me more information on that, and whether they had any near-term projects such as the PRIP that would include a need for funding. So I should be getting that list soon, and I will include it with the list of near-term projects that the PRIP needs funding for, and I'll send out the full list together. Yes.
You mentioned the list at the last meeting. Will you be sending that out?
I did mention the list the last one, and then I found out that our utilities also has some near-term projects, so I want to just add them together. So I'm sending out one full list as opposed to 2 mini lists.
Gotcha. Yes, thank you.
And that way it's easier to just have that one document from Southern U. But that's the update I have in regarding tribal access to clean water. Any other comments? Okay. All right, so that is that was the agenda item for tribal access to clean water, and now we'll move on to the discussion regarding potential solutions to existing hurdles and challenges, and we'll continue that discussion. I'd like to open up the floor for our other sub-task force members.
Lisa, can I say something?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I think in anticipation of our sub-task force meeting later this month, I think that will be helpful in determining where the state can play a role and where we can potentially push the federal government to fulfill their trust responsibilities, and through financing and funding. And so I think that's going to be a critical meeting for all of us to get additional information of opportunities where the state can play a role. And I think that meeting's November 29th. Am I right on that?
Correct.
So for the November 29th meeting, who did we invite? I think you had mentioned Nate.
Nate Pearson and Lauren Riss.
And Kevin Ryan.
And Kevin Ryan.
We had talked about a federal person that might be able to help. I don't know if we came up with any names.
I thought we were gonna ask Nate.
Okay.
Okay.
We should be asking him ahead of time though, so that you can. Are you able to ask Nate, Becky?
I emailed
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and he already confirmed, both confirmed, and Nate said he would be online for this meeting. So,
Perfect, that sounds great. But in terms of also inviting or figuring out which federal person to invite, I guess we thought Nate would have a recommendation for that.
I will ask him for a recommendation.
I also talked to some of the larger task force members the other day for contact. And I can reach it back out to them. So if they've got good ideas, people that work with federal entities on contract.
But that's done. I had a few thoughts to offer on sort of the solution space, but I don't wanted to make sure Becky was done.
I'm done. I'm taking notes about my responsibilities and already sending out the request.
So thinking, since we met a week ago about this, and one thing that isn't necessarily a recommendation for a solution, but might shape sort of what comes out of the task force is that when tribal water rights are quantified, in the settlement, in the case that we have in Colorado, that's the forever water for the two tribal nations and all of the present and future members. And I sometimes feel like as we're grappling with crisis in the Colorado River Basin, that there is this push for the tribes to have to develop all their water, to make development decisions really fast and not sort of at the right pace for the tribe and the membership. And so I just want to make sure that as we're thinking about tools to create drought resilience in the state that were sort of making room for the tribes to make decisions at the right pace. And so I think that, there are some opportunities that we might look at, like building better infrastructure from the start so that water delivery occurs and the service is coming to homes and farms and communities. But, we know more now, we have access to better technology. And so just wanted to sort of start with that I don't think it's appropriate for each tribe to have to come now and say like how they're going to develop and use all their water, and that might change over time so that we're not driving towards that. So again, I don't know that that's a specific solution, but it was in my head after we talked. Second thing that I was thinking about, I was really thinking about Ken Curtis's public comment and the history that we have in the Southwest Basin about working together, particularly when things get hard. And I think both tribes have a long history of working across boundaries with water users and all of our tributaries here. And so I think that there might be some opportunities for us to look at tribal priorities and stewardship and look at sort of the uplift that might come to the whole basin, or how we might work collectively as communities. And that's not to say that wholly tribal priorities or single purpose projects are not important and shouldn't move forward. I think they should. I think we've heard about some that we can make recommendations on. But I also think that, our rural communities and small cities have a lot to gain when tribes are stewarding our rivers well. So, how can we look at appropriate ways to get tribal priorities and sort of build them into the approach in the basin? And that might mean, how tribal and state and basin implementation plans all work together so that we're building resilience across sort of tribal and rural and other lines that we have here. We haven't talked a ton about the state's work in the healthy forest and rivers realm, and I do think that there's a lot of opportunities to work together there. So be happy to explore that and sort of blend my expertise if the subtask force wants to talk about that. And then, I know that the main drought task force is looking at programs and tools that we might develop as a state. And I think, maybe coming out of the subtask force, just making sure that if new programs or tools are developed, that they respect and protect tribal rights and that they empower tribal participation if the tribes want to. And then I know that we talked about this last time, but we're at a moment for leveraging and accessing state federal funds, and I'd really like to see some of that funding come to the Southwest Basin in ways that serve the tribes. And so how do we get there? What are the roadblocks? How do we get them out of the way for the basin? So those are a few thoughts. I don't know if you had any, Steve.
I think with those thoughts, we can add another meeting onto the task force to go through. Certainly I agree with most everything you said. I think trying to dive deeper, and I guess from my position, get some examples from you. You've worked in this space a lot. When we talked about coming down here with Forest Health, I know you've got a lot of experience in that. I certainly think that is a great tool for everybody, especially in the Southwest. That provides benefits. I would love to hear your thoughts on where some of that collaboration might go.
Yeah, and I mean, Lisa and Letitia might too,
Sure.
But there is a ton of work going on in the forests all around us, and tribal nations hold either interests in or are actively managing parts of those forests as well. So there's a huge infusion of money that's coming in for forest health. Is that actually benefiting tribal management or the management of places that tribal nations care about? And it could be that that becomes a separate discussion I know that the San Juan National Forest and some of the other collaborative forest health groups are interested in, working with tribes, but just making sure that as the money is coming in, that we're seeing benefits to the watersheds that the tribes are relying on. And also acknowledging that these headwaters are the ancestral lands of the Ute people, and that they may be exercising treaty and other rights on those lands.
Also, you mentioned obviously develop, if any new tools are developed, make sure tribal has correct access to it. It kind of goes to some of the other questions I think maybe we'll get to on the next agenda is what works for the tribes, what doesn't work for the tribes, sort of within the tools, the administrative, the funding space that we're going to talk about. So certainly important there as well.
So I haven't been focused at all and don't know much about the forest management and health issues or funding that's coming through there. Are there any examples you can give of some of those funding opportunities?
I mean, some of them are coming through the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, and I think Nate and Lauren will be well positioned to talk about those. And it sort of depends whether our scope is the nexus between forest and watershed health, which is the space I'm most comfortable with, but also want to acknowledge that there are really big forest health collaboratives, it's like alphabet soup, the RMRI, the CFLRP, like all of these collaborative forest health groups that are bringing in millions of dollars to increase our community resilience, particularly in the wildland urban interface. So it might depend on sort of how much we want to dig into.
And so, I mean, obviously RMRI is big. I mean, it's forest, state, county. I thought tribal had some role in the RMRI, but I'd like to understand that further too. I'm not sure.
I think that might be a good question for Lauren Riss. When she comes, she may not be able to give the intricate details of some of the programs that have already been initiated, but she might be able to do a high level. And I'm taking notes, so I'll mention that.
So are there things that you're working on, Celine, that are dealing with watershed health and forest health? Is it like focused on the San Juan River Basin, or is it only the Southwest Colorado area?
So there's work in the San Juan River. I'm doing work all over the river basin, sort of across all of the state and tribal boundaries. But I also support other sort of similar work across the basin. I think one example we could talk about is the Mancos Street Management Plan was the first that I saw that had inclusion for both the federal national park manager and the Ute tribe as part of its planning process. And I don't think they've completed their sort of project list yet, although I should check on that. But that's an example of sort of taking a look at watershed health and different projects that could be done, but doing it across private, public, and tribal lands.
So with that, Mancus Watershed Plan on meeting, since, on Wednesday to talk about that. So if anyone else wants to be included.
You can make us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so did any of the other sub-task force members have additional comments or? Okay, you seeing shaking of heads, all no. So we're moving pretty quickly through our agenda today, but I think we'll be spending a lot of time on our next agenda item, which is to develop questions for the Colorado Department of Natural Resources and the state engineer for the November 29th meeting. Celine, do you want to kick off since you have a few questions already created?
Absolutely, and at the request of the other task force members, I spent some time thinking about a question list for Nate and Lauren when they come visit with us at our next meeting. And so, wanted to make sure that I was framing it right. So I was thinking about like, what are we doing here? Why are we asking these people to come join us? And I really thought that we're sort of looking at challenges and opportunities for better tribal access to state funding. And I added in something that we can take out that we did not discuss last time. And it was really having read Attorney General Weiser's comments to the main task force. And there was a point in there where he had some recommendations around the state managed federal recovery funds, and I saw a bit of an intersection there. So it is in the draft that I sent out. We can pull it if it doesn't make sense. But I was really thinking, okay, like what are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And I think keeping a pretty close eye on challenges that might require legislation to fix. So sort of starting from there, I thought that we might want to, let Nate and Lauren know that we're sort of interested in hearing about state programs. I thought that we might be most interested in Colorado Water Conservation Board, the Water and Power Development Authority, which does drinking water, but also has some forest health funds, and other relevant DNR programs. If we want to hear more about forest health or COSWAP or Colorado State Forest Service, we should probably flag that because there's a lot of programs. And then I put together a question list, which I can run through. We may want to add or tweak or remove some today. But I was thinking first we could ask, what's the focus of and the priorities for these programs? And then look at eligibility, like can tribal nations, tribally owned businesses, and tribal members, are they eligible to apply for these funds? And if not, is it going to take legislative action for them to be eligible applicants? So just we know, can a tribal business member or tribe even apply for the funds? The next big question that I had out of the meeting was about matching requirements and just trying to figure out if they're set by the statute or the agency, and then looking at ability to adjust or waive match for tribal projects. Is that going to take legislative action? I know some of the Colorado Water Conservation Board programs over time, the match requirements are set in the statute. Sometimes they're set by the agency. It depends on the program. I put in a question about sort of level of familiarity that the staff that's responsible for the administering the program might have with the history and needs of tribal nations. And then I thought it might be helpful for us to know, like, has a tribal nation ever applied for funding? Have they been awarded funds, or have they been partnered on projects? Just sort of, have tribal nations ever tried to use any of these programs? And if so, did it go well? Did they get caught up in contracting, like we heard at one of our prior meetings? And then a broader question about sort of how much tribal nations were considered in either the legislation creating the programs or in agency criteria guidelines. You know, have the agencies sort of thought through what it might be like to deploy funds for a tribal project, or is that sort of ahead of us in the future? And then I thought we should ask about any known barriers to tribal use of programs. The example that came to mind for me is in the federal realm, I've seen that the federal agencies are starting to have different requirements for stakeholder outreach for tribal projects than they do for other projects, and it has to do with sort of respecting tribal sovereignty and how planning processes are done. So I've seen that change at the federal level and wasn't sure if it had sort of made it to the state level yet. So I'm going to keep running through, and then we can open all of this up, and I'll get it all out on the table. I was thinking about, you know, there's a few places outside of grant programs that I thought we might want to sort of dig into opportunities for accessing funds. One of them is the projects bill, which Becky can explain better than I can, but, you know, trying to give a question around the Arkansas Valley Conduit, which had access to the projects bill program. I thought it might be worth learning about the eligibility process for the revolving fund for the Water and Power Development Authority, and whether that's something the tribes have done or can do. And then the last question was really around Attorney General Weiser's recommendation for taking unused federal stimulus funds for water infrastructure projects that are identified in the water plan. And just understanding, does that mean that funding might be available to tribal nations? What is the process going to look like? Is it going to run through a grant program, or would it be different? So that is a lot. We can unpack all of it. It was just to get a set of questions started, and hopefully we can refine this today to get it ready so that we have some good questions to ask our guests.
First, I really appreciate you taking the lead on this. I had a chance to look at them this morning before the meeting. It's a great starting set of questions. I'm sure they'll lead to 100 more questions. So thanks for doing this.
Yes, thank you, Celine. I think it is a great start. I've written a few of them down, but I know Nate Pearson's on, so he probably heard it and is documenting also to make sure that we have solid answers from the state's perspective on those. The unused federal stimulus funds, I have no idea on, but I'm sure we can find some answers. So thank you for your work on that, Celine, first and foremost.
So let me ask the question. It's probably to Celine and Lisa, because it's a legal one, and I'm not an attorney. But I know it's an issue that's tripped up tribal projects before, and that's the question of jurisdiction. You know, everybody wants to put jurisdiction in a contract. There always seems to be a problem with that. I don't have an answer, but is there a simple solution to that? Because I've seen it more than once trip up projects before.
And so I guess, is that in reference to just receiving a grant from the state or from the feds?
Again, coming from the non-attorney perspective, who's got jurisdiction if there's a problem with the contract, you know, for getting the project done? How it's written into the contract.
So I've thought something.
And I don't have any thoughts, but other than I've seen it as a problem before.
Yeah, so I think, you know, with the tribe, we would want tribal jurisdiction. And we push for tribal jurisdiction in our contracts. But I guess it depends on whether it's with the state or the feds on how that is worked out. But I may call our water resources director to help us out with this question since he has a lot more on the ground experience with this.
Yeah, so at least my experience with there's grant agreements, you know, the tribe will review the grant agreements and then just approve of those terms. But I think Lisa's right, where typically the tribe wants some indemnification. Most of the grants I've dealt with are federal. I haven't had much experience dealing with agreements between the state. But I'm wondering if that's something could be hashed out with like MOU or something along those lines if there were specific concerns, I imagine, with the help of attorneys that could get ironed out.
Yeah. And I'm not looking for an answer today. It just seems like that's an issue that seems to constantly pop up. Is there an easy solution that we can offer up? That's all.
Yeah, so, I mean, just in terms of realities, we review, as he said, the legal department does review the contract internally. And it's been my experience that we always want tribal jurisdiction, meaning that if anything happens, we're gonna go through tribal court. But all of those can always be worked out with the US and definitely with the US. And I don't know if we've had specific contracts with the state of Colorado, but those are all things that just are worked out with whatever the legal departments.
That might be something we could ask the wildlife department about, because I know they have a close relationship with like Division of Wildlife. They may have some examples of agreements they've done with the state. That might, I can make a note to contact Aaron, see if he has any insight.
Just so everyone knows, tribal court jurisdiction all the way.
And I think what I would add is, fundamentally, this is going to be a negotiation between two governments that hold sovereign immunity and that have, you know, sort of government related restrictions on sort of what they agree to. And we could see this as an opportunity for Colorado and the tribes to sort of set a template that could be used again and again for flowing funds between the state and the tribes. So yeah, it could take some work. These negotiations always take a while to sort of land in that middle ground that everybody can at least live with. But maybe we can get a template that has controller office approval that can be used. So every time a tribe wants to access funding, they don't have to renegotiate. That's sort of my best case scenario is work out the details, you know, see what works, adjust what doesn't. But, you know, usually the first time you negotiate something, it's hard, and then you have a template to work on.
Yeah, and I think that came up in our discussion last week when we were talking, last week. When we were talking about Ute Mountain Ute tribes issues with one of the grants, the technical assistance grants that the tribe applied for, and just trying to work out some sort of, I guess, template, like you said, just a base contract that those two sovereigns can work off of, that makes some of those issues go away. Because it sounds like what's happening is this is the first time that grant has been applied for from Ute Mountain, and so you guys are having to work through all of those issues right now, but hopefully that means in the future it's much more simple because you work through all of the issues. And now you have that contract in place that everyone can work off of. And it'll pave the way for Southern Ute if we decide to apply for a similar grant. I mean, I think Celine's right. Just having that first contract in place is really helpful.
I feel like I should do this, but is Southwest ever contracted for a grant agreement with the tribe?
No, not that I'm aware of, at least not since I've been around. So.
Celine, I really appreciate the way that you went through your questions, kind of starting with that focus and eligibility. I mean, these are all questions and issues that we've talked about in our prior sub-task force meetings, and it's really nice to see it laid out in those steps that we've talked about and how we've been talking about it. And I know that at least it would be nice to know what those matching requirements are for all of these various programs, and whether there's a way to adjust or waive those matches. I think for Southern U, where I've heard those issues come up mostly for those matching requirements are with federal grants. I don't know that Southern U has applied for any state grants that require matching dollars, but maybe I can ask Pete again if there's been any situation there where the state of Colorado has required matching dollars.
You know, I'm not aware, at least with water resources. One person we may want to ask is Nikki Drought, grant writer.
Okay, yeah.
She may have some insights on issues she's had in the past with grants in the tribe.
Yeah, so that's something we can follow up on and make sure that we do have issues with that before we speak to the to our invitees for the next meeting.
And I was gonna also extend an invitation to Stacy Coleman to speak at the next meeting. Maybe any, I know she just started too, but any maybe gaps or anything that she can speak to of where she could use some assistance, CWCB or any.
I think it'd be great to have her.
I think it would be helpful. Also, I've been trying to keep her briefed up on all of the interactions, but it may be good for her to be present and see this. And again, I'll send her a message right now.
You know, you don't work there anymore, Commissioner.
She's not CWCB, she is DNR, and I do work in DNR, so there you go.
Good clarification.
I guess I'll mention the only thing I wasn't sure fit here, I wasn't sure how it fit was, you know, we talked about the potential need for demonstration projects for tribes, and I don't know if that should be added to that sort of outside of grant programs, but if there was anything we wanted to recommend testing, how would we make sure there was funding for that?
So I think from Southern Youth's perspective, I would like to talk to our in-house team before we decide whether there are any demonstration projects we want to bring up. In terms of asking if there's a way forward for funding. I don't know if we have anything concrete right now that we would like to pursue, or if it's more of a theory and something out there that and whether it's at a place where we would ask for funding. So that is a question I will follow up with in-house and get back to you all as we're putting together the next agenda for November 29th.
Most of the questions on this list seem focused on DNR, CWCP funding agreements. Nothing really in here for Kevin Ryan. Are there specific administrative type questions we think we should have put to him?
So I think we put that, or we wanted to invite Kevin Ryan to speak to the sub-task force on the issue that Ute Mountain brought up about shepherding water. I think it was for the possibility of shepherding water through New Mexico for Ute Mountain to pull out. Was that right? Or was it
Yes,
for?
on the San Juan.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned in a previous email, I wanted to talk to our water committee about that issue. And if we wanted to continue the discussions on that issue with this task force. And so I wouldn't be able to have any kind of decision or have any discussion about that until the next task force meeting.
When is your next task force meeting? Just so I know when we can kind of start finalizing the agenda.
Our next water resource meeting is on the 13th. Yeah, no, November, let me see yeah, the 13th. And so I wouldn't know of an answer until then.
Okay. I just made myself a little notes so that I don't send out the draft agenda. Or I can send it out first draft and put some other issues on there and we can send it out again. So other than that, I guess then do we have questions for the state engineer?
Yeah, unless I know the direction from the water resource committee, I can, yeah, I won't be able to create any questions.
The thing I can think of is maybe having them talk about the measurement rules and sort of where that's headed and if there's anything there to take a look at as we see a future where more of our rivers are going to be administered more often and sort of what that might mean for the tribes who tend to sit lower in the watershed on the sort of state boundary and sort of anything that he's thinking about in that sort of measurement rule process, and we're sort of tightening up and getting ready to have more regular administration of the rivers. Are the tribes engaged in the measurement rules process?
We attend the stakeholders meeting.
I actually don't know. I'm gonna bring a question over to our water resources division head here.
Yeah, so we've been following the measurement rules pretty closely, and we went to a few of the open houses, and I think they've been doing a great job of being pretty transparent and trying to give people enough heads up on what's coming that we're pretty comfortable that none of those rules will really affect the tribe. There might be a few nuances worth a few ponds, but if we have to install measurements, so be it. But most of the Southern Utes direct diversions already have automated gauges and partial flumes, and we provide that data to the commissioner. So I don't foresee the measurement rules being too problematic for Southern Utes.
I'm looking through the notes real quick. I thought we did have another issue we wanted to ask. State engineer about. Sir, did we have a discussion on the water banking? And whether the tribes would be able to be a part of that program?
Yes, and that's from the 11th. On page 4, but do you want me to read it out?
Sure.
Discussion continued on broader recommendations list for sub-task force. What tools could be modified to be accessed by both tribes related to water banking, resiliency, and sharing? Does the state engineer have the authority to shepherd water? And would Ute Mountain Ute Tribe need the state of New Mexico to shepherd it? The sub-task force discussed potentially inviting state engineer Kevin Ryan to a future meeting, but would it take to shepherd water to Lake Powell and move tribal water? Becky clarified it may be someone else and not Kevin Ryan.
Can I ask a question specifically to Letitia and Lisa? I seem to remember that there's something about tribal water rights that essentially says the tribe should be able to access any program that other water users are able to access. Is that accurate? And maybe Celine, you know the answer to that.
Are you talking about the interstate provision in the Colorado Ute settlement?
I think so.
I don't want to interpret the settlement on behalf of the tribes that are sitting here.
I'd have to go back and look at the settlement, but I thought that was that language was in reference to whether the tribes could lease or market their water.
Okay.
So the tribes would be able to lease or market their water if other Colorado water users were able to do the same. So
Okay.
until other water users can do the same is how I think I read that provision.
Okay.
So it wasn't specifically, so it was specifically for leasing or marketing as opposed to grant programs or any of those other types of state programs.
Okay, that's, I knew it was there, I just didn't, I wanted to revisit the details.
You have to look at the settlement and the federal legislation because there was a federal override on part of that provision.
In the 2000?
No, the original.
Oh, in the 88. Okay. Oh, now my interest is peaked. I will go back and reread that. Do you remember what was the specific override?
Let me see if I can pull it up.
So I think these are the tools that are being discussed in the main drought task force, right? The water banking and the sharing of water, kind of.
Leasing, sharing, there's what, 10 or 12 tools that can run
Yeah.
through.
And so, I mean, I think really we could probably focus that in the main drought task force, making sure that the tribes are able to fit into those programs once they're chosen.
It's a good question to come out of both task force,
Yeah.
but or no.
I'm still pulling up the 86 settlement, but Pete was faster than me getting to the 88 legislation. So look at section 5B. It's the lower basin restriction. I think that was I don't think that's in the 86 settlement agreement, but it's in the 88 Act.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the language I was thinking of, that they can't do it unless other water users can do it, right?
Is this the same language that says that the tribes aren't allowed to use it on the state?
It doesn't So on page 60 of the 86 settlement is the original language that covers inside and outside the state. So you have to read that with the 88 Act. This is getting like pretty deep into the settlement here.
Yeah, so basically the 88 Act limited it to Lower Basin, right? I mean, limited the restriction to Lower Basin. Selling, leasing, or renting to Lower Basin. It's in the 86 Act, it says outside the state pursuant to state, federal, interstate compact, or international treaty. So they don't actually call out the Lower Basin.
Yeah, that's the difference.
It seems like they just wanted to make it very clear. You will not sell to the Lower Basin unless.
So we want to clarify that, or is that a recommendation? Or having what
No, I think we just got onto that because Becky was asking if that was applicable to all programs. So we kind of went off the.
Sorry about the rabbit hole, but I think it's still useful.
At least I don't have a recommendation on that language.
I guess the only thing I can think of is I think that there is some discussion at the main task force about shepherding. Is that right?
True, very true.
So is there anything that we need to ask the state engineer about any particular provisions of how the Colorado Union water rights settlement decrees might change the way he shepherds or administers, just depending on what recommendations come up from the task force?
Is there a difference between shepherding tribal water and other state water?
Or water through tribal lands. So is there anything we need to be aware of where we could be looking at ways to properly shepherd water, and we want to make sure that we understand the sort of tribal aspects of that?
I think that's a good question. We need to think about that a little more. To see if there's situations we want to ask about specifically, or if we just want a general question like you asked and see what has to say about that. I think I do want to think about it more to see if we have more specific question on that.
It sounds like we're unsure whether we need to ask Kevin to come on the 29th. We need a little time to think through it.
I mean, he did say he's available, and I let him know we'd be working on the agenda, but that he is invited to November 29th if he can make it and to answer any questions. But you're right, it does sound like we need to figure out some more about whether we do have actual questions for him.
But don't tell him yet, so it keeps it on his calendar.
Yeah, let's have him keep it on his calendar, and I mean, I do think we can come up with some questions for him, especially after I wasn't able to make it to the last Drought Task Force meeting, so I want to watch it and also look at the new list for tools and all of that, and then meet in-house to see if we need to talk more about the tools, and maybe from that there will be some questions for the state engineer. So I know that Colorado Department of Natural Resources just came and met with Southern U a couple of weeks ago, and looking at Celine's question on whether the staff responsible for administering the programs are familiar with the history and needs of tribal nations and indigenous peoples in Colorado. Were Nate and Lauren and others who are familiar with the funding at that meeting?
I'm sure you're asking me that.
Sorry.
Lauren was not. I was there. She was booked, but I think she's been given a debrief on the meeting, and actually we coordinated to make sure that I could do some presentation for CWCB.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious if some of that came out in the meeting with some of the history and needs of Southern U came out in the meeting, and whether the people who are going to be at our November 29th meeting were there in person.
I think it did come out in the meeting, and they will get a full debrief from Stacy before they come November 29th. I'm positive. And Nate's on the Zoom, so I'm sure he's hearing that and okay with it also.
So I mean, I like this list of questions. I think they're all really good questions to ask. The one question I don't have familiarity with is the outside of grant programs. The question regarding the projects bill and the reference to the Arkansas Valley conduit. Are you able to provide a little background to that project and how this would apply to the tribes?
I can, but Becky was the director of the CWCB at the time this happened, so I will defer to her unless she wants me to speak.
Celine, you can go ahead.
So when I served on the Colorado Water Conservation Board, we went through the process of getting what I think of as a legislative allocation for a critical clean drinking water project, the Arkansas Valley Conduit. This is a really big project. It's been on the books since, what, the 1960s, and to sort of hear testimony as a board member about, you know, kids who were still getting contaminated water with radioactive material in it at this time was really impactful for me as a board member. So I remember the process that we went through when projects are big enough, they get their own line item on the projects bill that goes to the legislature for CWCD funding. And so when I started thinking about what we were hearing about PRIP or other projects, there could be some high dollar projects where we are looking for match for a big federal allocation. And that was really what I saw happen with the Arc Valley Conduit. Now, of course, there are differences, but I thought it might be helpful for us to just make sure that we all understand what the process is of putting big funding requests in for the legislature to consider as part of the project's bill. And sort of, I don't know if either of the tribes have ever used that process before. And so to say, like, is this an avenue for securing funding for critical projects that we all agree need to move forward, or is this not the right fit? And Becky, I don't know if you'd have anything to add about the project's bill process.
I actually think that's a good question for Lauren when she comes also, because I think the projects bill process is a potential opportunity.
The other thing about the Park Valley Conduit is state and federal, big federal project. So there was a coordination between all three entities.
And a big local investment too,
Yeah.
the county. So it was an example of a project that was daunting, that had been on the books, that really needed to be funding, and how do you start leveraging all the funding together to get people safe drinking water?
And just for your information, Jim Broderick was at our last task force meeting last week, sitting in for Lee, and mentioned sort of the contracting experiences and trying to collaborate with everybody. So.
And I can't help but think about the universal access component and the work there, because I think that first raised the elevation of the need for universal access on tribal lands, and essentially the ABC was very quality focused and having benefit to extremely rural areas or rural areas with extremely poor water quality issues. And so, you know, one of the things that I think is important about ABC also is that it was an extremely long, focused process where it became the direction of Southeastern, and I'm hoping we're in a better place now with the federal government and funding, that things like this don't take as long as ABC did, and that ABC might have paved the way to move quicker, specifically on universal access issues on tribal lands.
Well, that's great. Thank you, guys. Thank you both for the explanation. So is the projects bill something that is funded by Colorado State Legislature annually, or is there just a large pot of money there for project requests?
It's an annual process.
Okay.
And I put a link into the webpage, into the email. If you haven't seen it, there's information.
And the next question that's focused on the Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority revolving fund. Is that a grant program as well, or is that more of a loan program, or do they have different types of funding? Does anyone know?
get all the state revolving funds of clean water. Kind of on the clean water side.
Okay.
There was somebody on visiting that's on the power authority. I don't know.
And Becky, is the revolving fund also has forest health in it now, right?
I believe so, yes.
What would you say, Steve?
Forest health, I think, too. I'm less familiar with it. I would be learning a lot.
We could get more detail from Lauren and Nate also.
And not to put anybody on the spot, but there is a member of public online that's on the Water and Power Authority that they might want to speak up.
I think they have to be upgraded to panelist. Steve.
You might ask Bruce Whitehead if you'd like to, if it's okay with the rest of the task force.
Sure.
Yeah, all right, everyone. Bruce Whitehead, you are being invited to speak. I'm going to give you permission to talk. You can reject it if you so choose. All right, Bruce is rejoining. He has decided to speak.
Thanks, Bruce, and I didn't mean to put you on the
Oh,
spot,
hold
but
on
I
a
just
second.
thought,
Right up here. Yeah, sorry.
sorry.
Just his computer's, there he goes. Okay.
So Bruce, sorry to put you on the spot, but I just thought you might be able to explain more clearly about Water and Power Authority, about what they do.
All right, Steve, I'm working on getting connected here.
We can hear you.
All right. You might be able to see me now too. The Water and Power Authority, as Steve said, it administers the state revolving fund, which includes funds that come from the federal government through the EPA, as well as some bipartisan infrastructure money that's out there. I'm not sure how that would apply to tribal uses, but I suspect, I can't talk out of school, we might have to talk with the staff. Those funds are intended for other entities, municipalities that have either need treated water supply or wastewater treatment supplies. And as far as whether they're loans or grants, they're really kind of a combination of both. They're administered as a loan program with principal forgiveness, depending on what qualifications are there, such as qualification being disadvantaged communities. So we have a meeting coming up in about a month, or I can check on that before then to see about if the tribes are eligible. I think they probably would be to receive some of those funds, or maybe their actual water treatment portion of the tribal government might be able to apply. So yes, there is some funding, and in regards to the Arkansas Valley Conduit, they also have been talking with the Water and Power Authority as well as the CWCB to try and work and coordinate those efforts to move portions of that project forward. So some of it's pipeline infrastructure, some of it's treatment, and the entities may have different authorities in there. In the case of the Arkansas, I think that the Water and Power Authority is really working with the Southeastern Water Conservancy District on that to see if they might be the applicant instead of having numerous other small communities apply for those grant funds. But that's kind of the program they run. It is kind of a combination of loan and grant because of some of the other federal funding that is coming in through the bill funds primarily.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's helpful. I will check into that a little more, and I can get the information back to Steve or whoever else on the task force would like to have that, or I can get some to one of the staff members in touch with if you have a specific question about whether a project may qualify. I can definitely get you in touch with a staff member that'll help walk you through the process.
Thanks, Bruce. I just wanted to make sure everybody got the right picture of water and power, so I appreciate it.
Okay, all right. And as Steve said, there are board members from each of the basins, and I'm the newest guy on the block. I was appointed back in January. There may be some others that are appointed. The terms, I think, expired in October, but I'm the representative for the southwestern part of the state.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Perfect, that was helpful. I saw the list of names.
That's not early on, so.
He has been demoted.
Demoted.
Or will be. Okay. There we go.
So do you think this is a question we would still keep on the list for CWCB and DNR?
Which specific one?
Um,
For the water and power question?
Yep.
I think you need to go to.
yeah, so I think they
Water
would get the
power.
question. Okay, so maybe we take that one off the list for next week, for the next meeting. Okay, but otherwise, I think all of these questions are really good questions, and I would suggest forwarding all of them except for that question about from the water and power to Colorado DNR. Does anyone have any other comments or questions? Are we okay with forwarding this list besides the water and power question? So we're now at 2:38. I think we went through our first couple of agenda items pretty quickly, so that got us into the main discussion pretty quickly. Do we want to do a short break so that we can think about whether we have more questions or think about if we have anything else to add before we start with agenda items for the next meeting?
And I think Kelsey will be needing a short brief update from us for tomorrow's update to the Water and Resource Committee as well, right, Kelsey?
I would love one, yeah.
Okay,
Should have mentioned that during your agenda, and I'm sorry.
perfect. So maybe we can
Thank
work
you,
on
Letitia.
that after the break. So let's take a 10-minute break. Okay. We will be back. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are back from our 10-minute break. And before we broke, we were reminded that the facilitator and then I think also the chair of the Drought Task Force will be providing a report to the Water Resources and Agricultural Committee tomorrow on the status of the Drought Task Force work and the Sub-Task Force work. And so we should have a discussion on what we would like them to report on the Sub-Task Force's work so far. If we can come up with a short paragraph or just a few bullet points or
Whatever you would like to say. We have 45 minutes, so on the schedule. I don't know if we'll actually have the whole time, but that's what we have scheduled, so
Okay,
whatever you would like.
all right. So maybe let's start out with some, I don't know, maybe we can just do bullet points or something to send to both the chair and the facilitator for their report tomorrow.
I think it'd be critical to highlight part of the reason why there's a need for this sub-task force and talk about maybe at least some, as brief as it needs to be, but some status on tribal settlement numbers and ability to access, and at least highlight that. So the Water Resources Review Committee can be aware of that. I think anytime we can get that in the spotlight, we should. And I think that's first and foremost.
I think I agree with that, but did one or both of you present to the committee not too long ago?
Yes.
And did they get that information, sort of these settlement numbers?
Mainly just, no, not the numbers.
Okay.
Mainly issues. I guess issues are mainly the barriers and
Big challenges that the
Challenge.
tribes are having in accessing water or using the water.
Okay, that's fine. I guess I agree with Becky of trying to give them some of the quantified numbers of what's kind of where they stand.
There's 2 chapters in the tribal water study that are posted, should have that information in it.
Which chapters?
Oh, it's on it's the one that was submitted.
The
Okay,
only
the
two
only
chapters we put on
Yeah, they're on the
SharePoint.
resources for Drought Task Force.
the tribal water study
Hmm.
for both tribes, I think.
It should be chapter 5.2, 5.3. 6 and 7 should have all of those.
Thank you.
That just kind of look at agendas, I think. Document.
I think it might be worth flagging the discussion we're expecting on the 29th around challenges and opportunities around accessing state funding, that come up that we're digging in.
Mhm.
Kind of outline whether they're policy fixes or legislative fixes. I'm not sure right now.
Yeah, I think that's great. Look at what we've discussed and what we plan to discuss, and then how we kind of come up with recommendations. Which was the outlining whether there are policy for legislative fixes.
And then your final meeting is the day after the main task force's final meeting, the 8th.
Right.
Anything else?
I don't, well, do we want to just have a statement in there, how we are? Well, at least some of us are on the main Drought task force and others are alternates, and so we're all making sure to stay abreast of the Drought task force's conversations as well, and making sure that we're going to integrate all of that information. You know, we want to make sure that, I think we want to make sure that they know that we are not acting as our own unit, that we are trying to also keep the main task force informed and make sure that we know what's being discussed there as well.
Probably good to point out that you two provide an update to the main task force at every meeting, which is awesome.
Thank you. You think of anything else you have until probably noon tomorrow
Okay.
for me to add?
Okay, so should we move on to the next agenda item? Does anyone have anything else to add for this? Okay, next agenda item is to finish up the meeting and add issues for our November 29th meeting agenda. And that meeting is, I believe we had it for scheduled for 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
So I did have a question on sort of the period of time between now and the 29th. My understanding is that the main Drought task force is going to be moving into sort of decisions and like actually evaluating recommendations. And that'll happen between now and the 29th?
So what was decided at the last meeting was that anything that is going to be discussed or voted on needs to be in some form for the group to read through and discuss before the November 9th meeting, and then the conversation will continue on the November 16th meeting. So the due date after that is for those online, I'm putting quotations, final, not actually final, but mostly final wording on any proposed recommendation is due by November 30th. And then the task force decided that they will take a vote on all proposed items on December 7th. That ring true
Yeah,
for both
with,
Letitia
I
and
mean,
Steve?
the ideas concept have to be submitted by a week from today.
Yes,
Correct.
by November 6th,
Yeah.
11:59 p.m. on November 6th.
Sometime so.
Yes.
And then next
Pacific
week we
time.
have an all-day meeting in Glenwood, and we start drafting, trying to put those concepts on paper.
Mhm.
Just see if those things in discussion we think we agree to,
Yes.
we can do.
That's actually really good to know.
I guess I'm wondering, will the three of you be able to handle sort of issue spotting or saying like, oh, that one has a link to something we're discussing in the sub task force? And sort of, I was really thinking, like, can we get any input back to the main task force in a timely manner if we're not?
Yeah, I think if, let me ask this. At the 29th meeting, can we try and put some of these concepts on paper that then we can forward to the main task force to have them report, and then everybody can look at those overlaps? Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
But
Let me look at the calendar. Okay, so there's gonna be a vote on December 7th, right, at that meeting?
That is the date the task force selected as the official vote on each of the
Okay.
potential recommendations.
29th is our next sub task force meeting. So would we have, yeah, I think we can get, we should, I mean, we have to get it done.
and
But
I
should
guess
we,
on our December 8th meeting, we can discuss if there's what happened at the December 7th meeting. I don't know, but we do have that final meeting scheduled at least. To say
yeah,
yay or nay or something.
yeah. And we made that one virtual, and I think, so we're saying on November 29th, we want to put on paper our recommendations coming out of the sub task force, and you want to share it with the main drought task force, just so they know what we're recommending.
I think that makes sense.
Okay,
Because by December 7th is when the drought task force and Kelsey is going to be actually trying to format some sort of report, correct?
That's correct.
okay, but they're not voting on our recommendations, but just so that they can see what we are recommending.
I assume it's going to be one report. This is going the same.
Is it?
As far as, I mean, that's my understanding of the legislation.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be one report and with,
But there'll be
Subsections.
recommendations specifically coming from the sub task force
yes.
Yes.
and then from the main drought task force.
I guess in my head, I'm thinking a little bit about, do we need to take a look at what the main task force is voting on? Or can you three be on point to say, oh, that one could impact tribes? Like, so do we need to spend part of our time saying, is there anything that's being put forth in the main task force discussion that needs input from the tribal task force? Or are we going to be focusing on our own set of recommendations and how linked are they to the task force recommendations?
Good point. And I think after November 16th, we'll have a pretty good idea what's going to be in front of the big task force, correct?
That's my hope, yes.
So maybe it would be important for the two of us that aren't on the main task force to sort of have a pretty good idea pretty quickly after there, anything that we need to be taking a hard look at before the 29th.
Yeah.
And I think you three will be best positioned, although I can talk to my colleague who I'm the alternate for on the task force as well.
That'd be good. Becky, does that make sense to you?
Yes.
So for the 29th, each of us, whatever recommendation we have for this task force should be already drafted in that.
I mean, I think we would need to put something in writing to at least share with the group, and then we can all work as a group to determine how to either edit it a little more or add something or take something out or whatever.
And recognize that things that we might recommend, we might just get answers to that day from our guests that are coming to speak.
Yeah.
So we might have
So November 29th to December 7th will be a very work-intensive week for the subtask force.
So any recommendation about state funding will be after the 29th, after we have the conversation with me and or
We have a pretty long stretch of time between now and the 29th. So is there anything we can be doing now to be ready, or do we all feel like we've got to wait for the main task force to get through their next 2 meetings and then we'll start working?
Well, I think, well, the November 16th, no, what meeting, 15th? 16th. There's a November 16th meeting, and I think there's going to be a lot of discussion there that will narrow down what the drought task, well, we hope what the drought task force is looking at. So I think if we make sure to watch that, and we can start, I think we can start thinking about our own recommendations after that. But I guess it's really just be on top of what each drought task force is thinking about. But I think in terms of the tribes, I mean, I know that we'll be thinking, at least in terms of Southern Ute, we'll be thinking about some potential recommendations, because it is a whole month away. And I don't want to waste that time. So I know we'll be thinking of potential recommendations that we can bring to the subtask force group.
Would it be helpful for you all to create a shared Google Doc that would be on the website that you could populate with information, as like we did for the main task force?
Probably yes.
Probably yes. Okay. And we'll get that in the works for you all. And just for anyone that is not familiar with that concept who might be listening, it is a shared Google document that is viewable by the public on the task force website. It is at the bottom of the resources page, and anyone on the subtask force has access to enter information and edit information on there, and the public is able to view it.
Looking at the calendar, there's a lot this next coming month. For the drought task force to come up with their recommendations in a month, or to bring down the list, and then for us to come up with our recommendations.
I think it would be helpful for us to have time to hear from our invited guests first, but be mindful that we have a lot to discuss. We have a big chunk of time, but I also want to make sure we can move through the discussion with Nate and Lauren, and then have a solid chunk of working time for the sub-task force after that.
It is worthwhile in the report to provide some of the background information, the stuff you guys presented on the first day, stuff you're going to talk to them about, quantified prior rights. To me, that's good information to have right there to anybody that wants to read it.
Have it in our final report with the recommendations.
Yeah, just up front, up for the tribal task force, just sort of a background.
Okay.
Not my wonky notes, but you have to read the act and the settlement together.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Those are pieces we could work on right away.
Mhm.
See,
Yeah, I was like, okay, good.
I'm gonna cut base what you guys say. So.
Now, as we're all preparing for the next meeting, in my mind, we might have a little bit of a split between recommendations for state legislative action and recommendations on federal matters. And so just sort of checking, like, is that sort of where we're headed? It seems like there's been both in some of our discussions, but there might be some, I was thinking about WIN Act appropriations or, federal policy. And so should I be thinking about that sort of split between this is what the state could do and this is what we could seek on the federal level?
Yeah, I think that is what we discussed. Definitely having recommendations for our state legislators and then having recommendations for how they can help support the tribes in federal issues.
Yeah, and what's been discussed at the larger task force is possibly asking the state legislature to do a resolution to support certain federal issues, requests, whatever. So it would be included in that, I would assume, that's what we're going to do.
That makes sense. Okay, so agenda items, we've got discussions with CWC lead and Colorado DNR. Discussions with Kevin Ryan. Who was the other person you wanted to invite, Stacy? Okay. We've got, so right now we've got the CWCB, Colorado DNR invited, the state engineer's office invited, Stacy and Coleman, yeah, invited. We're gonna need time to draft recommendations. I'm looking at my notes just to see what else we have in there. I think that's all we have. I mean, it's not all, it's a lot. Does anyone else have any other agenda items that you would like to add to our next meeting?
Will you be taking public comments at that meeting?
Yes. Okay. But considering that we haven't had too much public comment, we want to just do like 15 minutes?
Well,
Yeah. Okay.
I think sort of beginning and end
Okay.
makes sense, just in case something comes up that we've public wants to weigh in on.
Sure. Okay, so we'll add that in. Did you have, sorry, directed my question to Kelsey, our facilitator. Did you have anything you wanted to add about public comments for this meeting? Did we have any written public comments that we weren't able to see?
Yes, there is, you received a written public comment that I am sharing with you today from Ed Millard, and so, yes, that will be coming to you all.
Will that be the meeting notes that will come out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there also is a public comment from Ed in the Q&A that will be added to the meeting notes as well today. Okay, so I got your comment, Ed.
Thank you.
We reopen to see if there's any public comment before we adjourn.
Sure. Okay, so we are finished with this portion of the meeting where we decided on agenda items for our November 29th meeting. And we are going to close out this portion of the meeting and return to public comments periods. So if there's anyone online or in person who would like to make a public comment, please do so.
All right, if you are online and you'd like to make a public comment, please put your name into the Q&A. And let's see, Joan asks if we can share Ed's comment. To clarify, Ed has 2 comments. He submitted 1 written comment, and that will be added to the notes from this meeting. And then Ed also put a question in the Q&A, and that question will also be added to the notes from this meeting as well. And I think you should be able to see the comment that he wrote in the Q&A. So if you cannot see his comment in the Q&A, please let me know. Give everyone a few moments. Any comments from in the room? Okay, thank you, Joan. All right. Seeing no public comments in the room, no requests for public comments online. Joan, the comment, all Ed's comment and question will be added to the meeting notes, so you will be able to see them in the meeting notes when they come out. All right. No public comments.
Okay, well, we have no public comments, so we are going to, I'll ask for a motion to close the public comment period.
Sure. So much.
Second.
All right, thank you. We are at the end of our meeting. Does anyone want to make a motion to close our meeting? Letitia, thank you. Second.
So moved or seconded.
Great, thank you all so much for your time, and we look forward to our next meeting.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you all.